Well, that motivates our first question from the audience online while we've been on the air already. Rockwall Independent School District asks this question: what kinds of specific projects, Michael, have you done with your students? And do Michael or Chris have specific examples of good activities, good projects that do build all the critical skills that you've talked about so eloquently? Michael, you begin.
Yeah, I take a real sort of a menu approach almost to my planning, and so 1 week is going to look very different from another. This week, for instance, we've been studying renewable and non-renewable resources. I teach 7th grade, by the way, so we've had students. I basically split up the class into teams of about 3 or 4. Each team works for a different power industry, whether that's fossil fuels or nuclear or wind or solar and so forth. I split those teams up again to try and make them as heterogeneous as possible and with different skills. And each person on that team had a job to do. And so they did research basically for a couple of days, some through written stuff, others through internet research, and came up with a presentation that they were going to make then to 3 students who were representing political candidates for governor of Oregon. And the idea was to get that political candidate to endorse as much of their type of power generation as possible. So it ended up giving the students, instead of just being a research project, it became really more of a business. It became an entrepreneurial enterprise. And it's one that really encouraged students to be collaborative, to think about the big picture, to work on presentation skills, which are extremely important, we know. And to think about scientific issues in the context they usually occur in, which tend to be political. So we had, the 3 candidates were representing the 2 major parties and an independent party, and they were researching the party platform as everyone else researched their energy source. They made presentations. The candidates chose their sort of blend of which industries they were going to support based on the presentations and on their party platform. We then had in fact, just today we had a vote to see who would sort of take the cake.
And yes, nuclear didn't win in Oregon.
Nuclear did not win. Well, the vote was for a candidate. Interestingly enough, the candidate that won supported pretty heavily the coal and natural gas industry, and there's a couple of reasons why that might have happened. I introduced, before the students could vote, I gave them each an individual identity. Basically, they were not just themselves voting, but they were either a factory owner or an environmentalist or a grandparent or a student or some sort of cross-section of the voting public. So they had to sort of take on that role and say, okay, if I'm this person, what are the things that I value and how would I vote? And then there was also a large campaign donation from the fossil fuel industry to one of the candidates, who then sort of used that for advertising, which ended up with some interesting discussions in how that worked. But then I allowed the students then to vote on what they would actually choose, and thankfully they showed a little bit more environmental responsibility and chose a slightly more expensive but much more renewable and environmental friendly.
Interesting.
Solution.
Interesting.
But it's just a different way of approaching it. And next week I'll be moving on to other things. I'll be integrating art in the curriculum. We'll be doing some theater pieces. We do labs. So it's a very multiple approach. There's not really one thing that's going to work across the board all year long.
Some specific projects that develop these critical skills?
Well, Michael sketched, I think, a good template for this. You start with something complicated in the real world. It has a scientific dimension, but it has human dimensions as well. Students come at it from different aspects and disentangle it. With Institute for Education Sciences funding, we're building virtual ecosystems. We have a digital pond in which one morning when the students come to visit, all the fish are dead. So did somebody electrocute the fish? Were they poisoned? Was this a natural process? But how could it kill them so quickly? And students learn a lot of complex causality in science, deconstructing the fact that the subdivision a few hundred yards away was over-fertilizing their lawns, and there was a lot of different things that happened that led to the fish dying. So I think I think activities that start in the real world so that students see them as authentic, that are complicated so that they provide a genuine challenge for students, they don't know what the answer is in advance, and that bring in the human dimensions as well as the scientific dimensions are really, really powerful.